You are not rational with money. Nobody is. And the reason has nothing to do with intelligence or discipline. It is hardwired into your brain, and it is costing you in ways you have no idea about. Losing $100 feels approximately twice as painful as winning $100 feels good. That single asymmetry, loss hurts more than equivalent gain pleases, is one of the most documented and consequential findings in behavioral economics. And it is not just running your financial decisions. It is running your relationships, your career, your health choices, and your willingness to change anything about your life. Today, we are going to understand why and what you can actually do about it. The story begins with one of the most important intellectual partnerships in the history of psychology. In the 1970s, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, two Israeli psychologists working at Hebrew University, began a series of experiments that would eventually earn Kahneman the Nobel Prize in economics and permanently change how we understand human decision-making. They were interested in a simple question. When people make decisions under uncertainty, do they behave rationally? Standard economic theory at the time said yes, that people weigh probabilities and outcomes logically and choose the option that maximizes their expected value. Kahneman and Tversky suspected this was wrong. What they found was not just that people are sometimes irrational. It was that human irrationality follows consistent, predictable patterns that can be mapped, measured, and understood. Their central finding is called prospecttheory, published in 1979 in one of the most cited papers in all of economics. The core insight is this: people do not evaluate outcomes in terms of absolute wealth or absolute gain. They evaluate them in terms of changes from a reference point, usually their current situation, and those changes are not evaluated symmetrically. Losses feel approximately twice as powerful as equivalent gains. The pain of losing $100 is roughly equal to the pleasure of winning $200. This is not a small distortion. It is a systematic, consistent, cross-cultural bias that affects virtually every decision involving risk. And it produces predictable failures of judgment that cost people money, opportunity, and well-being every single day. Here is a simple demonstration of loss aversion. Imagine I offer you a coin flip. Heads, you win $150. Tails, you lose $100. The expected value of this bet is positive. On average, you come out ahead. Most people refuse it. Now imagine the same bet, but you win $300 if heads, lose $100 if tails. Most people still refuse. Research shows that for most people, the potential gain needs to be approximately 2 to 2.5 times the potential loss before they will accept a 50-50 gamble. That 2-to-1 ratio is loss aversion in its purest form, the mathematical signature of how much more losses hurt than gains please. And this same calculation is running in the background of every financial decision you make, every job you consider leaving, every relationship you consider ending. Loss aversion produces some of the most damaging and most consistent errors in financial behavior. The disposition effect, the tendency to sell winning investments too early and hold losing investments too long, is one of the most robustly documented patterns in investment research. Investors sell their winners to lock in the pleasure of a gain and hold their losers to avoid the pain of realizing a loss. The rational strategy is precisely the opposite. Cut your losses early and let your winners run. But loss aversion makes the rational strategy feel emotionally intolerable. Selling a stock at a loss feels like a defeat, a confirmation of failure, something to be avoided as long as possible. And so people hold losing positions for months or years longer than any rational analysis would support, paying the real financial cost of an emotional bias they do not even know they have. Loss aversion is the engine behind one of the most pervasive biases in human decision-making, the status quo bias. People systematically prefer their current situation over alternatives, even when the alternatives are objectively better, because change involves the possibility of loss, and loss is weighted twice as heavily as gain. This is why people stay in jobs they dislike for years, because leaving involves the certain loss of security and the uncertain possibility of something better. Why people stay in relationships that have stopped working, because ending them involves definite loss of familiarity and connection. Why people keep the same insurance plan, the same phone provider, the same subscription services year after year without evaluating whether they are still the best options. Inertia is not laziness. It is loss aversion, the brain's built-in preference for the devil it knows over the devil it does not. Quick recap before we go further. Loss aversion. Losses feel approximately twice as powerful as equivalent gains, a built-in asymmetry in how the brain processes outcomes. The disposition effect. Investors sell winners too early and hold losers too long because realizing a loss is emotionally intolerable. Status quo bias. We prefer our current situation not because it is better, but because change involves the possibility of loss. All three are expressions of the same underlying pattern. Now, here is the part that goes well beyond financial decisions, and that affects almost every important choice you will ever make. Loss aversion shapes decisions that have nothing to do with money. In relationships, the pain of losing a partner, even a relationship that has clearly run its course, is weighted twice as heavily as the potential pleasure of a better relationship in the future. This is why people stay in relationships that make them miserable for far longer than any outside observer would advise. In careers, the fear of losing status, income security, or professional identity keeps people in roles they have outgrown, preventing moves that would almost certainly improve their lives. In beliefs and identity, the prospect of losing the certainty of a worldview you have held for years, of being shown to be wrong, is experienced as a loss, and loss aversion makes it feel safer to dismiss contradicting evidence than to update your beliefs. Loss aversion is not just a financial bias. It is an existential one. Understanding loss aversion is also essential for understanding how you are being manipulated by it, constantly, deliberately, by companies that have spent enormous resources learning exactly how it works. Free trials are designed around loss aversion. Once you have experienced something, losing access to it feels like a loss, not a return to neutral. This is why cancellation rates for free trials are so low. The default is renewal, and changing the default requires accepting the psychological weight of a loss. Limited time offers exploit loss aversion by framing inaction as losing an opportunity. Your cart is expiring. Only 3 left. Offer ends in 24 hours. These are not informational. They are emotional manipulations designed to make inaction feel like a loss. FOMO, fear of missing out, is loss aversion applied to social experience. The sensation that everyone else is gaining something you are losing by not being present. Loss aversion also produces one of the most economically irrational but emotionally compelling patterns in human behavior, the sunk cost fallacy. A sunk cost is money, time, or effort already spent that cannot be recovered. Rational decision-making says sunk costs should be ignored. What matters is the expected future value of continuing versus stopping. But loss aversion makes sunk costs feel like a loss that can be recovered by continuing. If you stop now, you lose everything you have already invested. So people continue watching films they are not enjoying because they have already paid for the ticket. Continue relationships that have stopped working because of the years already invested. Continue businesses that are failing because of the money already spent. The sunk cost is gone regardless. The only question is whether continuing is worth it on its own merits. Loss aversion makes that question almost impossible to answer clearly. Knowing that loss aversion exists does not automatically neutralize it, but it does give you tools. 3 that research supports. First, reframe losses as costs. Language matters to the emotional brain. An investment that lost value is not a loss. It is the cost of the information you gained about that investment. A failed project is not a loss. It is the price of the learning that makes the next one more likely to succeed. Reframing does not change the reality, but it changes the emotional weight, which changes what you are able to do next. Second, pre-commitment. Make important decisions before you are in the grip of loss aversion. Set your sell price for an investment before you buy and commit to it in writing. Decide in advance what would make you leave a job or relationship and write it down while you are thinking clearly. The decision made in advance is not contaminated by the loss aversion that activates when the moment actually arrives. Third, evaluate the cost of inaction. Loss aversion makes action feel risky, but inaction has costs too. They are just less visible. Deliberately asking what staying costs you in opportunity, in time, in well-being, counterbalances the asymmetric weight that loss aversion gives to change. Kahneman spent his career studying human irrationality, and he was notably humble about his own susceptibility to the biases he had spent decades documenting. He said that knowing about cognitive biases does not make you immune to them. What it does is give you a fighting chance of noticing when they are operating. Loss aversion will never feel like a bias when you are in its grip. It will feel like caution, prudence, wisdom. The stock you are holding at a loss will feel like it deserves more time. The relationship you should have left will feel like something worth preserving. The sunk cost will feel like an investment that should not be abandoned. The feeling is real. The reasoning is distorted. And the gap between those two things, between how something feels and what it actually is where understanding psychology actually matters. Loss aversion is not a flaw to be eliminated. It is a feature of how the human brain evaluates risk, one that kept your ancestors alive in environments where losses were often irreversible and catastrophic. The cost is that, in a modern world where most losses are recoverable, it systematically steers you away from good risks and toward costly inaction. Knowing that is not a cure, but it is the beginning of a different relationship with your own fear of losing. Is there a decision in your own life where you can see loss aversion at work right now, something you are holding onto or avoiding because the potential loss feels bigger than the potential gain? Drop it in the comments. In the next video, we cover flow state, the psychology of being completely absorbed in what you are doing, where time disappears and performance peaks. It is one of the most positive findings in all of psychology. Subscribe so you do not miss it. See you in the next video.